Day 5, GitHub. This is one of those moments in the series that we're going to have to take a step back from command line. The best way to frame the pain here is that I want to be able to share code with you all. That means sharing projects or sharing assignments or sharing things for you to practice and get experience with these coding concepts. And the best way I know to do that is through GitHub. Not to mention, the best way for us to get the local code, the things we did yesterday, those changes we made with Git and tracked the changes with our commits onto the internet is through a service like GitHub. Imagine you're on a product or you're on a team. You need some way to take the code you have on your machine and give it to other people to be able to deliver to the people paying you. These are fundamental skills of communicating with the thing, the tangible item, or at least as tangible as we can make it, item to others. We're going to start with creating an account on GitHub. We're going to talk about how to get it set up on command line. So here we go with GitHub. We have our machines where we create code. We track our changes through Git. Think of this as local. It's physical. It's right here next to us. It's the stuff we're creating right here. What we do with these changes, we push them up to remote. It's a server. I'll show this using GitHub. What we do is push our changes up, and we pull any new changes that maybe we didn't create or we saved on the cloud or through a service like GitHub down to our machines. These are commands inside of Git that allow us to push the changes up to the server and pull any changes we don't have down. Think of this as syncing, getting everything up to date. One other thing I'd like to note is there's an obvious benefit of being able to communicate with our code this way and track all of our changes, but another one is collaborate. We get to have our code on a service like GitHub and put comments on it, continuous integration and continuous deployment. I'm not going to go into depth on those right now. Just know that having GitHub at play now with Git allow us to do things like this. They empower us down the line. You'll then create an account on GitHub. I'm going to skip over that step because I'm not going to draw the UI from GitHub. Instead, I'm going to show you the commands to git, pull. As long as you're inside of a Git repository on your machine, which again, you can ls-a to ensure that there's Git inside of that directory, you can then pull and push with one major caveat. You need to set up your remote. That's why I use that term in this last diagram, remote, because this is a concept that you need to understand when setting up Git on your local machine. There's a lot of different flows that you can make this happen, but since we've already started in previous days modifying our code and tracking the changes through commits, we're going to go the route of, we're going to modify our local repo to point up to GitHub. There's a few commands to do this. Config local settings. This means that we'll have to configure our environment on our machines to ensure that it can communicate with GitHub. I'm going to link to a great resource through GitHub that takes you step by step, and I'll show you in just a second. Jump into GitHub. Starting off with signing up for an account. All right, I'm in an account. Turn on Do Not Disturb. Pro tip when recording your screen. Choosing a plan, something about this, skipping this step. Now that I've created an account, I need to set up my local machine to communicate with github.com. In order to do that, I need to Google it. This is hands down one of the most important skills to have as a product developer, being able to effectively Google things. GitHub setup local config. Look at this. First hit, setting up your username in Git. I'm going to link you to this, but I highly recommend reading through this. You can mostly copy and paste this into terminal. We'll set up our local configuration, which I copied and pasted from GitHub. I'm going to set my username as help me with code. And then I'm going to go back to Chrome, which I'm using Command in the tab key to switch quickly. Back to Chrome to set up my email. Next one is at the bottom. Git config global user.email. That this follows the same principles that I showed you with command line, which are the first is the command we want to run, what we want to do with the command, and then arguments. You can pass multiple arguments, and in this case we have global, so it'll be on every instance of every repository on this machine, and then user.email. We don't want to say what they wrote. Instead, I'm going to write helpmeunderstandcode@gmail.com. That's the email for this video. I can write git config user.email to ensure I wrote that correctly. Now that I have this set up, I need to go back to Google and find SSH. GitHub setup SSH. If you click on the first link, it should bring you to Mac. Make sure you're on the same environment that you're using. First thing you need to do is do the first step in here. I'm not going to go through all of these things in this video. I wanted to make sure that you saw me use the commands that GitHub was writing in the tutorials so that you felt comfortable copying and pasting from their website and running those commands on your local machine. Once you've followed through with all of these commands in here, you will be able to communicate with GitHub. Once you've gone through those steps, we'll be set up for tomorrow's content, which will be covering how to effectively pull and push code that we've created on our machines to GitHub. That's what I look at as the first little bit of the battle. The majority of the battle is gaining those experiences, creating things, and getting those tough pieces of feedback, or getting those pieces of feedback that, even though hopefully they're written in a positive, well-meaning, constructive way, it still can feel like it hurts. I wanted to mention this because it's one of the most poignant things that we covered when I taught with the Iron Yard, was this idea of imposter syndrome. It's where we're spending all this time in our heads trying to think of ways to be better or trying to learn new things, and that's very, very difficult to do. So when we put ourselves out there, we need some sort of positive reconciliation, positive feedback of that, because we're just beating ourselves up. And anyone even giving us constructive feedback on that can just break us down to even further lows. It's something that I struggle with every single day of my life, every single moment of creating code, but it's something that's known to me. So it doesn't necessarily take away the really painful feedback things or the really painful things that I know are wrong and they need to get better, but just by knowing them, just the act of becoming aware of it makes it seem slightly less daunting. Even though it still hurts the same amount, it's something that I'm aware is going to happen throughout the learning curve.